Hey guys, welcome back to our channel Get Here Soon. And also welcome back to the random interview question series episode 7. In this episode, we are going to discuss about the compiler and the interpreter. We are also going to see the differences between them. Without any further delay, let's get started. Both compiler and interpreter are used to translate the code written by programmers in high-level languages to low-level languages. What are high-level languages? High-level languages means what we human beings as a programmers write, like C, C++, Python, Java, Ruby, all these things comes under high-level programs. Now, these both compiler and interpreter will translate to low-level languages. What are low-level languages? Low-level languages means the language that computer understand. It is also known as machine level language. Now both are used, but what is the difference between them is few languages use compiler and few languages use interpreter. Now the compiler has a different way of doing it and interpreter has a different way of doing it. Compiler does all at once before execution. So compiler takes a high level program and translate all the source code at once to the machine level code, and after that execution happens. But what happens with interpreter is it does line by line during execution. So the interpreter does not take the source code all at a time. It takes line by line. It translates first line and then executes first line, translates second line, then executes second line. So it does both translation and execution line by line. So let's deeply understand compiler and interpreter. See, the first step here, the programmers write the source code. Few programming languages that use compiler are C, C++, Java, if it is using just-in-time compiler. This example Java I'm mentioning so that you'll understand. Java is a both compiler and interpreted language. If it is using just-in-time compiler, it can be considered as an example of compiler, or else it is an interpreted language. Java has this Java virtual machine, which is an interpreted language. Okay. So this is a special example, but other than that, compiler languages are C, C++. So for example, if a programmer writes or C or C++ code, then that source code is loaded into the compiler. Now this compiler will takes all the source code at once and starts checking the syntax errors, semantic errors, or it starts checking it and translating it. Now if it encounters any error, then it will again pop up the message, and once it is error free, then the compiler will produce multiple object codes. This object codes is nothing but the code which is having the translated machine code, from source code to translated machine code. So object codes are multiple files. So object code contains this machine code, any external functions, or any libraries, or any unresolved references. All these things will be present in the object code. Here we have one separate thing called linker, which links all the object code and will produce a single executable code file. Now this single executable code file is used to run the program. So till here the step is known as compilation. Which undergoes the process of translating code. Now this single executable file is used to execute the program how many times ever we want. We can just need to open this file and run this file. If it has user input, then it takes user input and gives us the output. So once we get the single executable file, we don't have to go to this compilation process unless the code is updated, then we are supposed to again do the compilation. If the code is same, then this executable file is enough. Now let's see how interpreter works. So just like compiler, there are few different changes. Just like compiler, the programmer writes the source code. Few examples of interpreter used languages are Python, Ruby, JavaScript, etc. Now Java can also be considered here. So when a programmer writes a source code in any of the language like Python, Ruby, the source code is sent to the interpreter. Now I'll tell you how interpreter works. For example, the source code is of 20 lines. Imagine the source code is of 20 lines. It will take the first line and it will translate the first line into machine level code. It executes the machine level code. Next, moving ahead, it takes the second line, translate into machine level code, then execute. Third line, translate into machine level code and execute. So the interpreter does all this process line by line. First step translation, second step execution, third step going to next line. So this is how it works. Now for example, in some line 8 or something, it requires user input. First the 8th line is translated to machine code, then it is executed, then after execution it will come to know, okay, it needs user input, so it will take the user input. Similarly, for example, if there is any line like some 20th line, the last line, if there is an error, it will translate the code into machine level code, so the machine understands, and when it is executed, then the machine understand, okay, there is an error. Then the error is popped up. The error message will be resolved by the programmer. So this is how it works. So translation, execution, everything happens in the same place. Now after all these things are done, all the lines are completed, then the output is generated. So like compiler, there is no executable file or anything. Every time you have to run the program, you have to go through all the process of translating and then executing. It is not like that in compiler. Now that you have understood how compiler works, how interpreter works, let's again recall the differences. Now compiler translate entire source code at once. It will take all the source code, it will take it at once and then do the translation process. But what happens with interpreter? It will translate and execute line by line. First step translation, then execution, then go to next line. This is how it works. Next, compiler generates an executable file, a single executable file. So whenever you want to run the code, you just need to execute this file. No need to go through the compilation process again and again if the source code is same. Okay, but interpreter, it is not like that. It will does not generate any executable file. It directly executes the code. So how many ever times you want to run the code, you have to go through the process of translation and then execution every single time. The compiler checks errors before execution, because the errors checking will be in the process of translating and it will be in the process of compilation only. Before producing the executable file, the errors will be checked. Whereas in interpreter, detection of errors during execution of each line happens, as we discussed earlier. Now moving ahead, few examples. This is also we discussed earlier. C, C++, Java, if it is using just-in-time compiler, can be considered as compiler examples. Interpreter examples are Python, Ruby, JavaScript, Java, etc. So these are the basic differences, and this is how the compiler and interpreter works. I hope you understood the video. If you have any doubts, make sure you comment below. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Bye bye.